sit.
Welcome to the Dynasty Nerds Fantasy Football Podcast, where we discuss Dynasty strategy, rankings, and all things NFL. So get ready to geek out on fantasy football with your host, Rich Dotson.
And welcome to the Dynasty Nerds Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm Rich Dotson. He's Matt O'Hara.
Hey.
And he's Garret Price.
How's it going?
It's going good. We're doing another remote show here. These hot Dynasty Boy summers have really got us separated, keeping us sweat off each other, which is, I mean, it's okay. I mean, it's all right. I still miss you.
It's okay.
Guys,
yeah, I like sitting right next to you. I like seeing you in person, but we got to do we got to do what we got to do, man. We got a lot of things going on. Summer, kids sports, all sorts of good stuff. Lots of conflicts. Right. Yeah,
it's hard to give you those eyes when Garrett's talking all crazy. Like, dude, what is this crazy guy talking about? You know, without like you being next to me. It's so much harder about remote. That's where you lose that chemistry. So, but we're back. We're doing another show. I won't be on next week or next week's Nerd Herd episode just because I'm going to the Outer Banks tonight or early tomorrow morning, however you want to look at it. Either way, I hate that drive, but I will do it nonetheless for the family.
Horrible. That is horrible.
Yeah, yep. It is. As Barkley would say, it's terrible. So we have today's show is another exciting analytical show. As we dive more into this and we plan to is, one of the great things that we have a privilege of our show is since Garret went full time, he has a lot more time on his hands for the site, for the tools, for our YouTube channel, which if you've seen our YouTube shows, great. I mean, Garret did an interview today with Andy Holloway, if I'm thinking correctly, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so that's going to be coming out. Make sure you check out the YouTube channel for that, the Fantasy Footballers. But, he has a lot more time to make our show better. It's like what we have planned for the in-season. Like, we're going to completely change the way we do in-season this year and bring so much more information along with entertainment for in-season shows. But with that, we always know, all you nerds out there, you like your analytics. And this show is kind of jumping off of, and listen, I love analytics too, to be honest with you. I love statistics, it's why I loved poker for so long. It's just, I love the odds and playing the odds and kind of, pushing it to the limit and pushing it to the extreme and bluffing with that terrible running back and coming out on top sometime. So today's show was kind of inspired about a show we did a couple of weeks ago talking about the tight end position and the statistical data point. And I'm sorry, maybe Garret, you had the guy's name who pointed out to us was if you were a top 6 tight end in the first 2 years of your career, and it had to be the first 2 years of career, there was over a 90% chance that you would be a top 6 tight end 4 or more times. And that number alone kind of like blew me away and kind of immediately knowing that data point changed the way I was looking at tight ends, especially first and second year tight ends going forward. If I see a guy that comes out and does it, like I'm immediately going to go into shark mode, right? Like I see the blood in the water. It's coming from the tight end's end and I'm going in there to get some. So we're like, hey, what can we do here?
Wait, hold on. There's blood coming from the tight end's end? The visual
man.
there is terrible, dude. It's bad.
Yeah, it is. It's terrible, and that's why I said it because I was like, "Oh, that's a really gross analysis
Poop
right
and
there."
Blood.
Yeah,
you painted a picture that no one wanted to see. Just to let you know.
Thank you so much. I really try to bluff my way into art too sometimes, and push it to the limit. Some things work, and all my haters obviously know some things don't. So. We took this point. We're like, okay, that's a really good data point for tight ends. And everybody who's listening should remember that. That's something you write down, put in your Dynasty notebook, your fantasy football notebook, and you store that in your brain forever. And now it's embedded code into my brain. So doing that, we're like, okay, what are some data points for the quarterbacks, the running backs, and the wide receivers, right? Like if that's a data point that's one data point we can attack for the tight end position, give me one data point we can attack at the other positions, because having that kind of information in your back pocket is the kind of information that's give you an edge over your league mates, because it's going to give you an opportunity to attack. And what looks like an overpay today is an underpay tomorrow. That's my favorite saying I've ever said. And sometimes being aggressive there and knowing when to be aggressive, when to what might look like an overpay can pay huge dividends, not just for the following year that you get that player, but for many years down the road. So how do we adapt that position, these positions and those data points? And Garret put about 20 hours in to this week to get us those data points. And he approached it. He found different ways to make each position work. So it's not the same data point for every position, which is what I love. Because listen, they're all three different positions. They all win differently. So obviously there should be different data points for each player. I think one of these is pretty commonly known in the Dynasty world. If you're very active in the community, you do a lot of research, that's gonna be the wide receiver one. But these other ones were new to me, and I learned something here. So Garret, if you want to start us off with the quarterback position and kind of lay this out in front of us, and then we'll dive in and have discussion.
Yeah. So this was a wonderful and frustrating and fantastic and cumbersome project all put together, because I went in with certain things that I thought would be good key data points. And for the quarterback, it was pretty close to correct. But things shifted and changed as we went in different positions and trying to figure out what was the best way to attack these young players to know who's likely to hit, and maybe even more so from this data, when do I know to cut ties, cut bait with guys? Because sometimes we hold on to guys thinking they're going to pan out a lot longer than we should, and it's better to move on, not draft those guys in our startups, not take these certain players. So all of these data sets are from the year 2010 through 2020. So an 11-year data set, similar to what we did with the other ones. We didn't want to, not give some of the earlier guys a chance to do this. So this is just focusing on the years that we have from 2010 through 2020. So with the quarterback position, here's what I was looking at. Is there a certain fantasy point threshold that is more significant to young quarterbacks than others? So as I was kind of digging into the data, I organized all the data. I literally, and I kid you not, literally went through every quarterback that was drafted from the years 2010 through 2020. So each year, big years, you're looking at classes of 15, 16 guys. Smaller classes, you're looking at 9, 10. But still, you're looking at a lot of guys from the past 11 years, over 100 quarterbacks. And first of all, I eliminated any one of them that didn't play at least 8 games in a single season. Those guys I just off the rip eliminated because they never even got a chance. They never even got a shake. So they would not be players anyone was ever talking about for fantasy football purposes. So I automatically eliminated those guys. Then I took the rest of the data set and I just kind of organized it. And I went and looked at how many points did they score in year 1? How many points did they score in year 2? What was their highest point per game output? And then what did they average over the course of their career? Because, and you'll see this as a common trend through all of these, I really wanted to see what was their highest points per game and their career average, because those two things put together give us a good fantasy football player. If a guy gives us 1 year of 25 points at quarterback, but that his entire career he averaged 11, well, that's not a very good quarterback. That's not helping us very much. That helped us for 1 season, but not long term. Now, opposite can be true. The guy could average 14 points a game for his entire career, but he never got above 16 points. That's not really helping us all that much. So you want the combination of the two, a decent peak, but also longevity. So I've said a lot already. Matt, Rich, does all that make sense on how I'm explaining it?
I mean, yeah, I think it makes perfect sense. Obviously, you don't want to be hanging around that 15 number too long. But when you're still in the league, you're still a serviceable guy at that point. So I think that's a good low watermark for like a longevity sort of line. So I get why you use that. That was the only one. You just don't want to be too much hanging around. And you mentioned that as well. Right. You want to be there year in and year out.
Yeah, I think that would fall into the category of like in a super flex league, like that 15 points per game is great for like your quarterback too, right? Like you want to have a high end quarterback, and then you want your quarterback to like, if you could average, I think that 15 points even right around maybe 14 points per game is serviceable, because then you're looking at like a high-end receiver, like low-end wide receiver 1, a good quality running back. To average that per year is a pretty good threshold for a quarterback 2. But if you want to win a championship, definitely in a super flex league, you need to have one of those high-end guys that's giving you over 15 points per game, or more likely than not, you're not going to stand a chance, because the rest of your roster be as good as as greatness on paper. The quarterbacks are always going to score the most points. So odds are when you get into your championship game, definitely if you are a have not at that position, more likelihood the person you play is going to be a have and put you at a huge disadvantage for a big game. So, guys that don't meet all thresholds that we're talking about here, like good quarterback 2s, Baker Mayfield, Derek Carr, Tua Tagovailoa, Ryan Tannehill with his good Tennessee days, right around there. I mean, guys that all kind of fit the bill, right? Like those guys sound like, oh, those are okay quarterback 2s. Like you don't want any of those guys to be your quarterback 1 on a contender, right? Those are guys you're trying to sell, try to offload, or buy as your quarterback 2.
Absolutely. So when I went through, the threshold that really kind of showed itself was in their first 2 seasons. Now, the way I marked first 2 seasons, and I marked it differently at quarterback than I did the other positions. It was their first 2 seasons where they got 8 or more starts. Because we know some guys will sit for a year or 2. Jordan Love is an example where he sat for multiple seasons. So that was kind of the threshold that I went with. Guys, their first season, I counted as their first season where they had 8 or more starts on the season. So, or 8 or more games played, I should say, on the season. So this is what it came out to. 17.5 was kind of the key number. 17.5 points. Now, just for reference point, over the 11-year span that we looked at, that was roughly the average of the quarterback 12. So the last of the QB1s was at 17.5. So roughly you need your quarterback to be in that quarterback 1 conversation, about 17.5 points per game within the first 2 years. Here's why that's significant. First of all, we had 22 quarterbacks of all of the guys that we talked about. We had 60 quarterbacks overall that we talk about here. That at least had 8 or more starts in a season. 22 quarterbacks had 17.5 more points per game in their first or second season. 18 of those guys had at least 1 season of 19 points or more. When you're hitting that 19-point threshold, you're approaching that top 6 range at quarterback there, depending on the year. So 18 of those guys. But even more significantly, 14 of those players in the top 22 that had 17 or more fantasy points in their first or second season, 14 of those 22, 64%, averaged both 15 career points per game. So over their entire career, they averaged at least 15 points per game. So they might have had a dud season or 2, but they had some that were in 18, 19, 20-point range. And had at least 1 season where they were approaching that elite range, that 19 points per game. 64% of those guys. So that tells you about 2 out of every 3 quarterbacks that have a 17.5 point season in their first 2 seasons is going to hit a 15 point per game career average and have a 19 point or higher season. Now, here's where it really hits home though, which I think that's helpful to know in and of itself. 2 out of every 3 times that a guy gets 17.5 points in their first season or second season, they're going to be a stud. They're going to be a solid quarterback for a long time. But this is even more powerful as an eliminator. 38 quarterbacks in this group here from 2010 through 2020 that started at least 8 games. 38 quarterbacks never hit that 17.5 point per game mark. So almost 2/3 of these guys never hit that mark in their first 2 seasons. Of those quarterbacks that did not hit that mark, only 2 of those quarterbacks ended up hitting the 19 points per game in a single season and 15 points for their career. So basically, if you don't have a 17.5 point season or better in your first 2 years starting, your odds of being a good, solid fantasy football quarterback are 5.2%. Because like I said, only 2 of those 38 guys were able to still hit those thresholds that we want for a good quarterback at a 19-point per game season, the peak, and a 15 points per game for their career. The only 2 guys to do it were Russell Wilson. He had a 17.2 and 16.9, so he just missed it, but he averaged 18.8 points over his career, had a 22.5-point season, and Ryan Tannehill just barely met this threshold and still could maybe fall out of it as a backup quarterback because he hit that 21.5-point season, but he is averaging exactly 15 points per game for his career. So he could still fall out of this. So that percentage could be lower. Russell Wilson could end up standing alone as the only guy that didn't hit 17.5 points in his first 2 seasons to hit that mark. So, Rich, Matt, what do you guys think?
First guy I want to mention here is, I think that's on the right trajectory, at least, is a guy that we talked about pretty heavily last week that you're turned on to, is Jordan Love. He averaged 18.8 points in his first year started. So that's a great starting point, right? Like we've been pounding the table him as a great buy. Everybody knows at this point in the community, he's gonna be tough to acquire, but like that's a great start for his career. And then and another thing I look at, Matt, too, is almost all of these quarterbacks, except for 3 of them, Dak Prescott, Russell Wilson, and Kirk Cousins, they're all first-round picks. All of them. I mean, Derek Carr finishes in the 15-point threshold mark. He was a second-round pick. But besides that, the guys are in that elite category that are going to average over 15 points per game. Those top 17 guys, at least, they're all first-round picks, and almost all of them are taken in that top 10. Kind of goes back to that threshold, like, hey, we want top 10 quarterbacks. You get guys like Lamar Jackson that go right out there. Deshaun Watson was obviously the 12th pick in that draft. Jalen Hurts was Jalen Hurts is another guy who was a second-round pick. But most of these guys, they're top 10 picks in the NFL draft, and that's where the bread and butter is.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, I think we've kind of gone over the numbers about the top 10 guys and their hit rate and all that kind of stuff at quarterback specifically. The ones that I'm interested in are kind of the guys that haven't met the criteria yet, but are the young guys that we should be kind of keeping an eye on, right? So you mentioned Jordan Love already, and he came out and did really well in his first season. The other guy, obviously Brock Purdy has crossed this threshold. Last year he was at 19.2 points per game. Obviously CJ Stroud at 18.7, another young guy. All these guys that have got CJ Stroud's got a ton of hype. Jordan Love is, I think, climbing that ladder. Brock Purdy is the guy that's really not talked about quite enough, I think. But I do believe he's going to be here to stay for a while. And obviously, there was a couple of other young guys last year. Jordan Richardson didn't meet the criteria because he only played 4 games last year. But in those games,
Anthony Richardson.
What did I say?
Jordan Richardson.
Sorry, talking too fast. Anthony Richardson. He had 18.4 points per game last year. So I think these are all guys to be excited about their future. We all expect Anthony Richardson to, meet that threshold as long as he plays a full 16-game season, and obviously on the backside of a lot of rushing upside and touchdown upside. But I guess conversely, some of the young guys from last year that didn't meet that threshold, I think we need to be worried about, right? Because if they follow that up again with another dud season, where do we go from there? And we're talking about the Will Levis, who only averaged 11.8, and he had 9 games starting. So he would qualify for this study in another year or two. And then obviously Bryce Young with full 16 games, not a 16-game season under his belt, and only averaged 10.4 points per game. Those are the kind of questions when Garrett's laying all this stuff out. I'm not really even looking at the guys that have already hit the benchmark. I'm thinking about the guys coming up now that we kind of need to focus on and what the future is going to look like there. So those are I think, important talking points for me anyway, because those other guys, they've been there, done that, and we kind of have to figure out who the next generation is going to be, right?
Yeah, I mean, and what makes me happy about that is like their guys. Obviously, Anthony Richardson, we had him as our number 2 quarterback, arguably our number 1 quarterback. There was a case for him to be number 1 in that draft. And we mentioned Jordan Love on the show, and he's a very known commodity. But like same thing, like I've been saying this show now for months, like Brock Purdy in a Superflex league is the best bang for your buck amongst all players. Like amongst all players, I think Brock Purdy is the best value you got there that's obtainable. Like go out and try and get Jordan Love, go out and try and get Anthony Richardson. Good luck at what you're going to part with, right? Like, and that's not saying Brock Purdy is cheap by any means, but he's obtainable. Like you go out there and still get him. Definitely if you package a guy like Bryce Young, like, hey, I'll give you Bryce Young, I'll give you a first, and I'll give you this veteran running back or something on those lines. Like it really could kind of make something happen for you. And I still stand by this because again, this data points are showing me like, hey, Brock Purdy, he averaged more than Jordan Love, right? And Jordan Love's going to go multiple rounds higher than Brock Purdy in the startup. So get somebody who's averaged almost that 20-point threshold so far in San Francisco, who just drafted another first-round receiver, who just extended their all-time GOAT fantasy football running back in Christian McCaffrey. Like Brock Purdy is set up for success here for long-term run this Kyle Shanahan system, which again, we've always preached, like if you're a quarterback in a Kyle Shanahan system, you're set up for success all by itself by the head coach and the offensive coordinator. So when you take Brock Purdy, I mean, he's really averaging guys that like you think are like all time, like super hard to go get, like the Justin Herberts, Kyler Murray, Lamar Jackson, Dak Prescott, Andrew Luck. Like that's the range that Brock Purdy is in right now. So like, I'm with you, Matt. Like you take these data points and then you identify where you can do addition and subtraction on your team. Oh, wow. I have Will Levis. I'm pretty optimistic. Like 5 games in, like he's only averaging 12 points per game. Like I better get out now, which would be a good time to get out, right? Because it's only in his second year. He might be still putting up decent, like in the grand scheme of things, he might be quarterback 15, 16. Same thing with Bryce Young. Bryce Young only into his second year. Maybe he's looking okay in 6 games. Somebody needs a quarterback, but like Bryce Young's doing that like Derek Carr, right? Like that Derek Carr mode. And you go out there and get out from under him and get a good haul. It's going to show you like this data points are at least pointing me in the right direction of a good sell and in the right direction of who's a good buy and identifying those data points. And quarterback's so hard to predict. It's good to have like some actual hardcore statistical numbers at the quarterback position and points per game that can help you identify who to get and who to sell.
One of the names that popped up while we were doing this, and I had to go check and see because I was like, did he hit the thresholds or not? Was Trevor Lawrence. So, because he was drafted in 2021, first year only 12.7 points per game. However, in year 2, he just eked it out at 17.9. So that makes me feel a little bit better that we saw enough in year 2 to say, yeah, maybe he could still be one of those better top end starting quarterbacks. So that helped me feel a lot better about Trevor Lawrence.
And that's exactly how I'm going to be watching Will Levis and Bryce Young this year with those kind of goggles on. You know what I mean? Is he gonna make it this year? Because if not, you know, who knows about his long-term future? And we saw a big change from Trevor Lawrence between year 1 and year 2. Obviously, the coaching staff changed and everything like that, but we saw the same sort of change there in Carolina, right? And the coaching staff changed there in Tennessee as well. So did the offense with both these guys. So if it's gonna happen, it'll probably happen this year under this new more offensive friendly sort of systems for both these guys, and they both got weapons added to their arsenals as well on offense as far as wide receivers and running backs and stuff like that. So it's gonna be interesting to see exactly how both those guys perform this year, and according to this data, it's going to be a big indicator as far as their long-term success.
And I'll also say before we move on to running backs here, it kind of shows me like a good buy for some names like that won't like a Joe Burrow, like using Joe Burrow as a sell point, for example, though, like a guy like by this name is Justin Herbert, right? And I know he had some great weapons and we want to see this play out in the system, but Justin Herbert's been an outstanding fantasy football quarterback for the most part, especially in Superflex leagues coming in here. I mean, this guy's averaged 19.7 points per game. You know, that's 0.1 point better than Dak Prescott on his career average on points per game. And only honestly behind Josh Allen, about 2 points per game behind Josh Allen on a career statistical basis. And we've seen his ADP plummet, right? Like we've seen it plummet because of what he's lost. And kind of like the way I look at it is like, it's a good way to like, where do you value Pat Mahomes, right? Pat Mahomes is going anywhere from quarterback 2 to quarterback 3 in startup drafts. Pat Mahomes last year had one of his worst years because they got rid of all his receivers. What they do this year, they drafted Xavier Worthy in the first round. They still have Rashee Rice, who they took prior to, and they're going to rebuild that wide receiver core for him. And again, a guy like Justin Herbert, who's that young, he still has still has a very long path and a very long career out here in LA. So he also kind of like somebody like when I look at his career data and what he's done in his first 2 years and his career average, kind of goes into that buy category of a proven veteran, but like, oh, hey, like I could probably flip. And I don't want to say Joe Burrow 100% because it's a 1 point difference per game, but there's going to be players out there, like even like a Dak Prescott. If you want to take a step back and get younger, you could probably flip Dak Prescott for Justin Herbert. You might obviously probably get something on top, depending on how they view Justin Herbert. But like if you want to get, let's say, 6 years younger, 5 years younger at the quarterback position, which is massive, right? That's a massive amount of years when you're looking at dynasty seasons. He's a high target for me outside of that Brock Purdy range where I'm looking at like top end quarterbacks.
Last thing I want to say here real quick. All of the names that I have highlighted in green, those are all the guys that hit the threshold of the first year and then also had the points per game and the career average. All of the names are like obvious names, like Cam Newton's in there, Dak Prescott's in there, Josh Allen's in there. Like all of these names are like not surprising except one. And I will go to my grave saying that this guy was a good fantasy football quarterback. He just wasn't a leader of men. And I think that was the issue. But Carson Wentz is on this list. Carson Wentz had a peak of 21 points per game and average for his career 16 points per game. If you look, you have to deal with people, and he could not figure out how to deal with people. But on the field, the guy could get it done. I rest my case.
Boo.
Hey, real quick before we move on, I also did want to mention that we're using. I'm not getting on a soapbox about anybody. I just wanted to mention that we're using the Fantasy Pros like standard scoring, correct? PPR. If we're
I actually got it all from fantasy data, but yes, it's the 4 point per passing touchdown standard kind of scoring.
Okay. Yeah, we probably should have identified this. Yeah, 4 points per touchdown. Everybody should probably know that. So, all right, let's move on to the running back show. Hey, Nerd Herd, this is Rich Dotson. I've got some exciting news for you. Underdog Fantasy is back with their annual Best Ball Mania tournament, and this year it's bigger and better than ever with a whopping $15 million prize pool. Best Ball Mania 5 is the ultimate fantasy football competition where you draft your team and then sit back and relax. No trades, no waivers, just your best lineup every week automatically set by Underdog. For just $25, you can enter for a shot at the grand prize of $1.5 million. Plus, there are tons of other prizes throughout the season, including $500,000 for the top regular season performer. And guess what? We've got a special offer just for our listeners. Use the promo code NERDS when you sign up, and Underdog will match your first deposit 100% up to $100. That's right. Double your money to get more entries and more chances to win. Don't miss out. Drafts are happening now, and entries close before the first game of the season. Head over to UnderdogFantasy.com or download the Underdog app. Sign up with the promo code NERDS and start your journey to fantasy football glory today. Must be 18 plus, 19 plus in Alabama and Nebraska, 21 plus in Massachusetts and Arizona, and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. The terms do apply. Concerned with your play, call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.ncpgambling.org. In Arizona, call 1-800-NEXT-STEP. In New York, call 1-877-8-HOPE-NY. In Tennessee, call 1-800-889-9789.
All right, running back portion of this. This is the one that literally kept me up till 2 a.m. last night. I was racking my brain on like, how do I get this to a spot where it's actually helpful and predictable? Because originally I was going in with the same concept. Okay, well, they got to hit a certain threshold in year 1, or okay, maybe not. Okay, maybe in the first 2 years. That still isn't super predictable. Okay, maybe it's a 2-year average. No, that doesn't help much. And so I'm like racking my brain trying to figure out, all right. And I'm like, I had one of those moments where it felt like a Rain Man moment where all the numbers are floating in front of you, in front of your face, or maybe it's just because it was in the middle of the night and I was delusional. I don't know, but it felt like one of those. And I was like, what do all of these players have in common? Like, there's gotta be a link somewhere. And then I figured it out. It was receptions. That was the link that tied all of these guys together. So what I did was once again looked at every single running back from, let's see, I had it from 2010 to 2020 again. Took out all the guys that didn't have at least one 50-touch season in their first 2 years. So you had to have at least 50 touches in your first 2 years, or I just automatically eliminated you. You were never a name that anybody was ever talking about in fantasy football. And it's fun going through the list of guys that didn't make the cut because there's so many names that were hyped for a certain period of time. And then that season actually happened, and you're like, oh, wait, he actually sucks. Oh, wait.
Ontario Hardesty.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many names in here. Jay Ajayi. Man, that guy was good, but no, he wasn't. Bilal Powell. Yeah, like there's so many names. It's a fun list to go through. Daniel
you have a long
Boone
list here. 135 people.
A lot of guys on this list. Of all of those players, though, what I was looking for was guys that, once again, I wanted them to hit the peak threshold and the longevity threshold. So I wanted them to be able to hit 16 points as a peak and average 12 or more points per game per season. So that will get you into that like 8-7 range at running back. So a really good asset, one of the top, 7-8 guys. And that'll get you 12 points per game over your career is harder than people think. Because yes, you could have a season at 16, but if you have another season where you play 16 games but you were more of a backup and you're only getting 3 points per game, that's going to crush your points per game. So it's tough to be consistently good for a long period at the running back position. So over the course of the 11 years, all the guys that were drafted in that time span, we only have 25 guys that hit 16 points per game in a single season peak and had 12 or more points per game for their entire season. So I'm looking at this list of 25 guys, and obviously all good names. I'm like, what links these guys? And I figured out it was receptions. Every single one of these guys except two. Every single one of them except two had at least 30 or more receptions in a season in their first 2 years. So this is what this tells me. Either A, the team is willing to make you a feature back. That's why you're getting that many receptions. B, you are looked at as a pass-catching weapon. So even if you're not getting tons of touches, you're at least heavily involved in the passing game. Or if you're not in that, that means that you were either not viewed as a featured back, not viewed as a pass-catching option, or you just weren't good enough to get playing time, period. Like you just weren't good enough. And so what we have here is, like I said, 23 of the 25 guys averaged 16 points in a single season and 12 points or more over their career. They had 30 or more receptions, all of them but two. The only two that didn't. Derrick Henry, no surprise to anyone, started off his career very slow, real anomaly in that sense, and he's just never been a pass catcher. The guy that was kind of surprising, though, was Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones was the other one. In his first two seasons, he only got to 26 receiving or receptions. But once again, this tells us more about who we should be eliminating more than anything else. Out of the 72 other running backs that did not hit that threshold of the 16 points and 12 points, of the 72, only two of those 72 that had 30 receptions didn't hit that threshold. So we're looking at 2.8% of that group. 2.8. So an extremely, extremely small number.
Which is going to, and those two were Chris Carson and Antonio Gibson?
Chris Carson and Antonio Gibson. They hit the thresholds. Now I'm even confusing myself. Yes, those were the two guys.
Yeah, and look at these numbers. Like if you look at these names, they're all well-known names in fantasy. I mean, like even Nick Chubb hit that threshold of receptions with 36. So
yep.
It does kind of show you like, hey man, this data point works. Is every name that you're looking at here was at some point a very high end value in Dynasty. I think maybe one person, and he's kind of been looked at like kind of a stray for a while, and it's James Conner. But like, even though his value hasn't been there ADP wise, his value's been there on the outcomes.
Production wise.
Yeah. His production's been very, very well for your fantasy football team. Like, what a great pick he ended up being, or a great trade he ended up being, James Conner. Cause he is what is he on this list overall? He's number 18 overall on this list, going back for that 11-year window. So sitting there looking at this, like, and obviously, I mean, this is something we say on the show as well, that we've talked about for years. Like, we want those pass catcher running backs. That's where the juice is. If you're not catching passes, like, your value is very, very limited in this space. And again, on a points per game basis, like, that's what we're looking for. We're just looking for guys that could score, like you mentioned, like a running back. Like, if you're giving me 13 points per game, like, that's a really good running back too. Like, a really good running back too. And what's more important, I think, a guy who averages you 13 points per game, those are still championship caliber players, because you could still win a championship if you have two running back twos that are in that realm. Like, you have a Kareem Hunt, right, who averaged 13.6. Then you go with James Conner, who's averaging 14. That's the difference between the quarterback and the running backs and the receivers, is where you can have two of those guys that are running back twos, but then you have multiple wide receiver ones and two really good quarterbacks in that tight end threshold, one of those top 5 guys. You're winning yourself. Odds are high that you have a good chance to win a Dynasty Fantasy Football Championship. So, like, it makes those guys very important as well. They now might be on that threshold of like the Alvin Kamara, but Alvin Kamara is a GOAT. We kind of went over that data when we did our running back episodes on that running back episode of odds of being a running back one multiple times. And Alvin Kamara averages 19.5 points. So yes, it's a 5 point game, 5 points per game difference, but they're already so far ahead of all these running backs already, where they're still living in that average threshold where you could still win.
Yeah. And for me, obviously these thresholds with only 2 outliers each way. And really it's Derrick Henry. Aaron Jones is in this as an outlier, but he was splitting time his first couple of seasons with Jamal Williams. In his third season, he had 49 or something like that receptions, and he's been above that, or around or above that ever since. So really, he is a PPR guy. It just took him 3 years instead of 2 to get that job and kind of really nail it down. But this, it's a very good elimination tool. I think it speaks to, like you said, Rich, a lot of the stuff that we kind of already preach. These PPR guys have a ton of value, and when you look at guys that aren't on this list because they haven't qualified yet, you got to love the outcome of Jahmyr Gibbs and his 52 receptions last year. Obviously, some of these other guys, Breece Hall in his 76 target, you know what I mean? Like, some of these guys are locked in as long-term guys, but it's James Cook, who some people have questions about, 44 receptions last season. And I think we kind of know or have heard that they like him a little bit more between the tackles than they ever thought that they would. So I think he's a guy that's kind of going under the radar a little bit here, in a guy that as a guy that can have value not only as a pass catching guy, but more of a 3-down back than I think anyone assumed when he came out of college. So those are the kind of guys I'm looking at now. I'm going to keep looking at, obviously, Bijan Robinson, 58 receptions. We all knew he was fantastic anyway.
52 receptions for Tyjae Spears this past year. Just saying, 52 for Tyjae.
Just saying, right?
But again, that's something to get you excited. Again, a player that we were excited about coming out in this draft, we gave a first-round grade to, and you go, okay, he hasn't produced. He looked really good at the end of last year, but now what can I hang my hat on? Because that's what you're kind of looking like when you want to promote a player, you want to buy a player, talk about him as an analyst, right? Like, you want something to hang your hat off besides saying, oh, my gut tells me, or I really like this guy. Why? Like, why do you like this guy? Well, I like Tyjae Spears because he's caught 52 receptions in his first 2 years. Historical data says that, like, the odds of you then averaging over 13 points per game for your career are pretty high. Matter of fact, like, so if you have done that, what's the percentage, Garrett, that you will average that if you do catch 30 receptions, what are those odds?
I can go back and get it. It was a little trickier to calculate that with all of the guys that we had it. But the bigger thing is if you don't catch 30 or more passes in your first 2 years, you only have a 2.8% chance of being a running back that's going to average 12 or more points in their career and have a season over 16. Like, so
okay,
if you have a running back that doesn't catch 30, that doesn't do it in their first 2 years, you can basically write them off. So like guys this year that I'm looking closely at, like I'm looking closely at a
Zamir White.
Zamir, well, this is year 3 for him, so I want to go back and look and see because that's going to be hard for him because I don't think he did in his first 2 years. I'm looking closely at Kendre Miller.
Hold on. I was looking at Zamir White because I wanted to at least know what he would have done. So his 4-game stretch that he was actually the starter, if you extrapolate that to a full season, he would have had 39 receptions. Just to let you know.
Hey-o.
And that's fair.
So
I was thinking
he might be an
that.
Aaron Jones type of guy that doesn't crack it till year whatever this is going to be. Is this year 4 for him or 3? 3, yeah. So
3.
It might be a year 3 guy to keep an eye on that might break the mold a bit if he really is able to do this. We'll see.
And I as soon as I said it, I realized like, oh, he probably didn't even meet that minimum 50 touches before his 4-game stretch anyways. Like he didn't have a lot of touches. And you're right. And I believe, take this back, don't hang your hat on a Taylor Spears thing. Use it as something to be excited about. But like, this is an eliminator tool, not like, hey, this guy caught, over 30 balls. Like he's going to be good. This is an eliminator tool for people that are building up if they haven't caught those balls in the first few years. Because tons of guys like Carlos Hyde came in, well, not Carlos Hyde, but like Latavius Murray, for example, caught 41 catches in his first 2 years. Eddie Lacy caught 42 catches, balls in his first 2 years. Miles Sanders, his first 2 years, 50. Trent Richardson, 51. So this is more of an elimination tool aspect than like to go out and buy, which is, again, is just as important to people, cross people off your list that it is buying your list. I mean, we did that forever during our rookie process early on in the Dynasty Nerds years, Matt. Like we really like kind of hammered home, like this is a guy you should not be drafted. Like this is a guy, like we focus on that just as much as like, ooh, we like this guy. We buy this, and we still do it now. Like this guy, we'll say, I'm like, this guy's kind of off my board, or I'll draft him in like the 4th or 5th round of my rookie draft. So like eliminating players in, again, will guys sneak through the cracks? Will guys be outliers? For sure. But like Garrett, you said, it's a 2% chance. Like right here, some of these guys are going to be outliers. Like the odds are so low. And same thing, like when you're dealing with the kind of stuff, like what else do you have besides like your eyes? It's just the odds. Like you're playing the odds. And if the odds are 2%, like, are you really going to put your money there? And sell on? Definitely at the running back position where it's like you can just go into the next draft class and get another one. So identifying those guys that I think still have value in the eyes of the Dynasty ADP, right? We kind of went over ADP just the other day. Why ADP is important. ADP is not only just important for, who am I going to draft at this position? It gives you the pulse of the community. So, oh, wow, this player jumped up 12 spots. Oh, how many receptions does he have in his first 2 years? Ooh, okay. This is a sell. And maybe I got a second, and you get a 2nd round pick, and somebody's like, oh, you just got bent over, no lube, and you got a 2nd round pick. But meanwhile, you're like, hey, I'm playing the odds here that this guy's not going to be a long-term success over 13 points per year. And I'm just going to take the 2nd round pick where I could turn into hopefully a gamble on a Marshawn Lloyd, a Jalen Wright, something along those times. Or I'm going to go ahead and get myself an Adonai Mitchell and see how those cards play out. And kind of keep flipping that narrative until you do hit. Because when you have those young guys, they're always going to be assets in Dynasty. So youth will always be something that you could kind of flip in those first 2 years. Because nobody's really out after first 2 years unless you're abysmal. So if you see some kind of flash, it will kind of be like this ever churning commodity until you kind of hit. Same thing. Like I made that big trade the other day for Breece Hall. Like I gave up 1.9 in a super flex league. I gave up Jermaine Burton, who I liked, and David Montgomery. And those are all, like, a lot of people, like, it was a 50-50, like 50% of people liked the trade, 50% didn't like it, which means it's a very fair trade. And in my eyes, it's like, okay, I took a bunch of like a Jermaine Burton, who I like, but he's a maybe. I took a 1.9, which we already did the historical data, picks 1.9 through 112 historically are 50% chance to be rosterable. And I got myself what I view as a top 30 asset, right? And where do you win championships with? Top 30 assets. And we talk about this on the show as well. Like, how do I build the best starting roster? Is it with that 1.9 Jermaine Burton, David Montgomery? No, you like those pieces in Dynasty. If your roster look better on paper, but full rosters don't win championships. Starting lineups do. So like I want to put myself in the best position to get a top 30 asset. So anytime you can kind of keep churning those average guys, which is going to be like guys under this are averaging 13 points per game, you're going to put yourself in the best position to win that ship and put yourself in that best position to win that 2 to 3 year window. Because that's all you're ever going to live in for the most part with your starting roster is that 2 to 3 year window. So the more chance you have to grab these guys that fall into these data points, you're going to increase your odds exponentially to win that ship is what we're all here to do. So let's dive into these. Let's cap this off with some receivers. I'm kind of excited to see what this is going to look like too. Hey, Dynasty Nerds, it's time to take your Dynasty game to the next level with FFPC's Dynasty Startup Leagues. Whether you're a seasoned pro or just getting started, FFPC has a league for you with entry fees ranging from $100 up to $5,000. Choose from a variety of formats, including Superflex, Best Ball Superflex, Triflex, 1QB, and Standard. With weekly lineups, waivers, trades, head-to-head matchups, and playoffs, FFPC's fully managed leagues provide the ultimate Dynasty experience. Most importantly, the leagues are here to stay. FFPC has never had a Dynasty league fold. They manage the entire commissioner experience from buy-in management to fulfilling your orphans. FFPC is perfect place to expand your Dynasty league portfolio. And here's the best part. As a Dynasty Nerds listener, you can get $25 off any entry fee as a new member when you use the promo code NERDS. Head over to myffpc.com now to draft your team, manage your roster, and dominate your league with FFPC. That's myffpc.com. Promo code NERDS for $25 off any entry fee for new members. FFPC, where Dynasty dreams become a reality.
Yeah, the receiver one shifted again. It's, we went from looking at points per game, then we shifted to looking at receptions. Now we're looking at wide receivers just in their rookie season. I don't even care about year 2, so we're figuring this out pretty darn quick. Just in their rookie season, do they hit 500 yards? That's all we're looking at here. So when you go through and we look at this list, there's a lot of good names, obviously, that hit 500 yards in their rookie season. But here's where the rubber meets the road. There were 78 guys. Now, if you scroll down here, we have 356 different players that were drafted. There's a lot of names that I had to go through. A lot. All right? So there's over 350 different guys that we went through here. Of all of these players, of those 300-some, 78 of those guys caught 500 yards as a rookie. All right? So the way that I kind of determined whether or not a guy was a hit, a success or not, is do they have multiple seasons as a wide receiver 2 or better? So it's not a super difficult threshold, right? You just have to have 2 wide receiver 2 seasons, a wide receiver 1 and a wide receiver 2 season, 2 wide receiver 1 seasons, whatever. Any combination there will get you to meet this threshold. But we saw that this, at first I was like, maybe this isn't a great metric, because only 34 of those 78 still had multiple wide receiver 2 seasons. So only 43%. So at first I was like, man, maybe this isn't as helpful as I thought it was. But then I took a look at it. Of those 34 players that were drafted, of those 34 players that hit 500 yards as a rookie and had multiple wide receiver 2 seasons, 31 of those were drafted on day 1 or day 2. So the only players that hit that threshold that were not first 3-round picks were Tyreek Hill, who wasn't even drafted as a receiver. So I wasn't even sure if I should count him, but obviously he's played receiver, so I put him in here. Stephon Diggs and Doug Baldwin. That's it. Same years, 2010 through 2020, only 3 of them. So 91% of those players that hit 500 yards as a rookie and had multiple wide receiver 2 or better seasons, 91% of them were drafted on day 1 or day 2. But once again, the biggest takeaway on this is the elimination factor. And this is a position that we tend to hold on to. These wide receivers we want to love and we want them to develop. But we're seeing, especially, and I'll show you where in the data it's even maybe changing to make this even more difficult. But of the 278 wide receivers drafted between 2010 and 2020 that did not reach 500 yards as a rookie, only 7 Only 7 had multiple wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2 seasons. That is 2.5%. So basically, if you do not hit wide or 500 yards as a rookie, if you do not do it, you only have a 2.5% chance to actually be a relevant wide receiver. That's it. And guys, this number is probably even going to drop. And you're going to say, it's at 2.5%. How could it drop much more? Well, look at the years on this. So there of the 7 guys, here were the 7. Kenny Golladay, Devontae Adams, Alshon Jeffrey, Golden Tate, Emmanuel Sanders, Eric Decker, and Antonio Brown. Right away, 4 of those guys were in the 2010 class. So this was an older thing where guys used to get a few more years to develop. They're not getting much time to develop anymore. So 4 of those were in the 2010 class. 1 was in 2012, 1 was in 2014. So that means between 2015 and 2020, there was only 1 guy that did not hit 500 yards as a rookie and still ended up having multiple wide receiver 1 or 2 seasons, and that was Kenny Golladay.
Sucks. And he still
wasn't that good. He only had 2 years where he did it, and that was it. And then he fell off the face of the earth. So seriously, this was the one probably of all of these that really convinced me. If a guy does not hit 500 yards as a rookie, you could almost just write him off, which is hard because there's a couple players I like, even one that I drafted in our next show that doesn't fit that mold. And I'm trying to figure it out in my head. It's still got to work. He's going to be the outlier. But honestly, if you do not hit 500 yards as a rookie, you can almost write him off.
And you could argue that you want to be a top 3 pick, like a top 3 round pick too.
Yes, absolutely. The guys that hit multiple wide receiver 1 years, they're guys that were drafted in the first 3 rounds.
And Garrett, I mean, going back to the guys that from 2010 and all that, Antonio Brown and Emmanuel Sanders, both late round picks, both on the same team. And they were loaded at wide receiver at the time. Those were developmental guys that they were kind of hoping. And they Pittsburgh always does it. They always have guys kind of in their pipeline before the other guys are ready to leave. Eric Decker had other wide receivers on that team at the time, so he had to work his way up. Golden Tate was at Seattle, where they refused to pass the ball when he started his tender there. And Devontae Adams was behind a bunch of good players as well. That was was that the end of the Brett Favre? Yeah, that was the end of the Brett Favre, beginning
the very end,
of Aaron Rodgers era. So he just needed to work a lot of these guys just needed to
that was Aaron Rodgers all the way, I think. Sorry.
Yeah, it was. But either way, there was a lot of good receivers.
They had a lot of good wide receivers. So, I mean, they were and like you mentioned, that was during a time when that was kind of more common for guys to sit and kind of do that kind of stuff. So this is a huge indicator for me. And obviously you look at the guys last year. Zay Flowers passed this threshold with 858 yards. Tank Dell 709. He was a guy that was a later round draft pick that a lot of people are hyped on, but he's passed this threshold, which is good. Josh Downs 771 yards, another guy that we can all expect good things from. I'm trying to see. I don't know.
What did Jackson
2 guys
Smith
that
and Jigba have?
Jackson Smith and Jigba and Quentin Johnston though.
628 Jackson Smith and Jigba.
Okay, he crossed it. We're good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Quentin
didn't though, did he?
I'm looking for him right now. I didn't find him yet, so hold on.
Exactly.
But Demario Douglas just made it 561. He was a guy that was a late round draft pick, but he made the cut and was kind of an impactful guy. Quentin Johnston 431 yards last year.
Didn't make the cut.
And this is probably the most common statistical data point. If you're on a lot of different sites or Twitter, you'll see hey, if that rookie doesn't hit 500 yards, he's almost dead in the water. And you're right. A lot of these guys were just buried on depth charts or late round picks, Matt. And remember too, I always think about this, what could have been. Remember, the Steelers desperately, they tried to sign Plexico Burst. They tried to. Mm-hmm. And Plexico was no, man, I want this kind of money. And they're all right, well, we'll just offer the same amount of money to this other guy, Antonio Brown, instead, who's been, looking pretty good. And they gave Antonio Brown Plexico's money. and what would have happened if Plexico would have, what could have been? Antonio Brown was an all-time great fantasy football wide receiver for that 6-year stretch, a top 3 guy, year in, year out, one of the greatest wide receiver ones like I've ever seen, So I think about that, like, oh wow, what if like Plexico would have just not like taken extra money elsewhere and stayed in Pittsburgh? What would have happened there? And same thing, like Emmanuel Sanders didn't do anything until he left Pittsburgh.
And another guy, kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum that didn't quite make the cut, but I'm interested to see kind of where he goes, is Rashid Shaheed. Only 488 yards his rookie season, so he just barely missed the cut. But last year, 719 yards, and he's got a pretty decent opportunity here ahead of him this year in New Orleans to kind of shine and be the number 2 guy. So he's an interesting guy that I think might, we're talking about guys that could drop off this list as far as outliers. He might be able to populate this list as an outlier and kind of flip the switch and not only go from a late round pick, but a guy that did not cross that 500-yard threshold in his first year and might still turn into something. So I don't want to totally eliminate guys, but I think he's a possible guy that could kind of buck this trend.
Yeah, and you mentioned Shaheed as a great buy. I don't know, what was that, like a couple months ago, I think. And what's funny is you were talking about that a couple months ago, and over the last probably 3 weeks, like I've seen a lot of Shaheed's name across my timeline as like that sneaky guy, that sneaky buy. And I always think, oh, Matt was talking about that like 2 months ago. So, and it's great. Like, and then obviously for Scott Fishbowl with the return yardage, like he was a high end scorer last year. He's been going really high in the Scott Fishbowls. Like
I just got snaked like 2 picks before I was about to pick. He got taken. So I was pretty bummed.
Oh yeah. When you guys get like when you guys are 10 rounds in, shoot me screenshots. Cause I'll be on vacation tomorrow. I'd love to see where you guys are in your drafts and how it's coming along.
I'm 10 in right now.
Ooh, yeah.
How I will. I'll shoot you a screenshot. How early did kickers go?
I took the first one in my draft in the 12th round. I took Brandon Aubrey in the 12th, but in that league, Brandon Aubrey was the 35th overall scorer in that format. And then I think then you had guys like Justin Tucker, whatever, like they were like 50th and 51st. Like whoever it was, Justin Tucker, one other kicker, like they were the 50th and 51st overall scorer. So like, who was available in the 12th round? I was like, okay, I could get the best kicker here in Brandon Aubrey. And like, I looked at where he finished last year in a scoring format, and it was 35th overall. I'm like, yeah, I'm definitely gonna be the first person to take a kicker here in the 12th round.
I mean, I think I'm about to pick it in the 11th round, and I'm 10th, but in the 11th round, I'm pretty early, so I'm like the third or fourth, or I think I'm 8th, whatever. I'm like the third or fourth pick in the 11th round. And it's a long time till I pick again. So I'm kind of contemplating going 11th round, but if not, I'm going to go 12th and let that start the run for sure. That's what I was thinking anyway. So,
and I think I picked him at 12-1. Like I picked him at 12. I had the 12th pick. So I believe I picked him at 12-1.
Hopefully this podcast doesn't go out before I pick a kicker.
There you go.
Yeah, so shoot me that over. I'd love to see it. I'll tell you, hold on. I'm gonna look this up real quick for my draft results for 2024. I took the first kicker. I know it was the 12th round, and I did take him at pick number. Oh no, it was 12-12, Matt. So it was not 12-1. So you probably can't wait around. I took at 11-11 Mike Williams, wide receiver of the New York Jets. Nice. And it came back. So the very last pick of the 12th round, I took the very first kicker in Brandon Aubrey.
What do you guys think about my Scott Fish t-shirt I'm sporting?
Very sexy. Very sexy.
I got the old school one on today.
And know what's crazy is you guys are both wearing Scott Fish shirts. And as I came down to record the podcast, my Scott Fishbowl Home Alone shirt was sitting there. I was like, I should wear my Scott Fishbowl shirt today. And I'm like, nah, I'm got my Dynasty Nerd shirt on already. And here you guys are rocking them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm drafting it. So I decided to do it.
My draft ended like last week.
It's like pretty fresh though, man. Like it's a Back to the Future one. It looks pretty nice, man.
It looks really nice. I like it a lot. I mean, and that's the thing with this year's shirts. So like we were all looking at them together. There was probably like 20 shirts we all liked. Like Garrett got his. It was Jurassic Park. I'm like, ooh, I like yours a lot. And then yours, Back to the Future, looks great. I've seen other ones online. I'm like, oh, that looks really nice too. And I have the Sandlot 3/4 tee, and I absolutely love that one too. So every time I see one, I'm like, oh, that's nice. Yeah, Scott and them guys over there, they hit it out of the park this year with the shirts. Yeah, some of you guys' shirts over. That's it for this show. A fun show. Hopefully those data points can stick with you guys. And you take a little bit with, again, is that all guaranteed information? Of course, it's not. Nothing's ever 100% guaranteed. There will always be outliers. But if you always play the odds, more likely than not, you will come out on top. And, maybe Shahid's an outlier, but it's a board. I think what we learned about here is like we learned how to eliminate more than buy in some of these as well. And again, that is just as important as like knowing when to sell and who not to draft, right? Like those are very important qualities in Dynasty, not just who you're buying, but selling, because what you're selling for will make your team even better as well. It's addition by subtraction. And the best time to sell is at its highest point, because nothing makes you feel better when you sell somebody and you get top value and then they never play again. Or like you sell Andrew Luck or you buy Andrew Luck and then he retires 2 days later and you're like, no, let me get my picks back. That's Garrett. That's what I was thinking of. Yeah.
Just set them on fire. Just burn those picks, man. Yeah. No big deal.
I just made this great trade for Andrew Luck. I gave up a lot, but I got a guy.
It was
these statistical numbers say it's going to be worth it. So we back tomorrow's show. We're doing we're trying to build the best team from a certain draft. I got 1-3. Garrett, you got 1-6, and Matt, you got 1-10.
Yep.
So we kind of looked at it and we went over ADP and players that were in that range and tried to build the best teams. I have no idea what your guys' teams looks like, so I'm excited to get into it. I went a real I decided to go a real young strategy. I was like, you know what? I'm gonna build a really young team. It's going to win ships forever. It's what they all say in the community. But we'll talk it out. I can't wait for tomorrow's show. We'll get into that. Hope this one's a good one, and we'll be back next week.
Adios.
Hey, guys, let me tell you about our friends at Sleeper. Guess what? Our app the mini is live on Sleeper right now. The Dynasty GM. Pretty. You can use the analyzer. You can use the trade calculator. And my favorite thing is the inbox, right? Where all your trades from all your Sleeper leagues are right there. You can actually push trades through the actual Sleeper app. And right now we couldn't be more excited to be partners with them. And right now, if you don't know, they are doing DFS. And I know how many people that play Dynasty play DFS as well. And right now there's not a better place to play DFS than Sleeper. They're offering up to 100 times your entry, the highest payout in the whole DFS market right now. You can track your fantasy players and your Sleeper picks in real time. All you got to do is choose 2 to 8 of your favorite players from pregame, live in-game, or even across different sports. Pick more or less than the predicted stats, and only on Sleeper you can get up to 100 times your payout. You can share with your friends and get rewarded together. Make sure you use that promo code NERD so our friends know that friends sent them their way. And get your deposit match and have a good time. Have all your DFS, all of your fantasy leagues, and now even a Dynasty GM in one spot. It is fully operational inside Sleeper right now. And then when you're a Nerd Herd member, you get that full access to that. And remember, you also want to download the Dynasty Nerds app because they're both in there. Check it out. Check our friend Sleeper. Check out their DFS. Use that promo code NERDS.
Get your whole estate.